So you're living here in the city, but you were still going to church for a long time.
Still going to church. I was teaching priesthood class, and I was the stake music chairman and stake choir director, and was getting lots and lots of fulfillment, personal fulfillment, satisfaction out of conducting the choir and being the center of attention in lots of different ways at church.
So what changed all that?
My parents came and visited and kind of observed my life in the church, and my dad, seriously, what he said to me was, "You are a rock star here. Like, you should see the way people look at you." And I realized I was just eating that up. I mean, I just loved being this choir director, and I think I did have a certain ability to like really challenge people and really get a choir to sing really well in church, and my choir got really big and really good, and people always looked forward to stake conference. We'd put on these big, huge productions, and I'd write these big Mac Wilberg-esque arrangements of hymns, and people would, you know, cry and the heavens would open. And I mean, it really, I have to say, it really made me very happy. I loved that. I think a big part of that was how much that fed my ego. Yeah, that was a huge part of my life. And I know my parents saw that side of me. They saw me teach priesthood, and they saw me conduct a big like Easter music spectacular at the Stake Center, and they were just so full of pride, and I know my mom still talks about that all the time. I think about that a lot, like how did that phase end, and what was the beginning of that end? And I think I would say that the very beginning of the end of that was me teaching priesthood class, because I had a way of approaching every lesson, which my roommate Trevor called it problematizing the gospel, which is I would take, if the principle was prayer, for example, that I was supposed to teach on, I would kind of go inside myself and find my deepest doubts about that topic, and find what was really hard or challenging, or where all the worldly evidence was against that principle. And I would just kind of throw that in the face of my class and say, all right, prayer. How many of us have prayed for things and not gotten it? How many of us have prayed with every ounce of faith we could muster and have prayed for a good thing and not gotten it? And how do we rationalize that? How does that not just feel like no one is answering our prayers or no one is listening to our prayers? And I would basically exhibit a total lack of faith in front of my class, and then discuss and let the class sort of work it out. And I would always try and have my own way out of this conundrum that I would present to the class, but often the class would come up with other ways that were interesting, or equally convoluted ways of doing mental gymnastics to get out of the obvious spiritual conundrum. But it became easier and easier for me to problematize the gospel, and I think that left lots of seeds of doubt, because I think I remember going away from my lessons with a great deal of satisfaction in the fact that I had really captivated everyone's attention for an hour, and that I could see in their faces that I had made a really interesting discussion happen, and that I was getting the credit for that, and thus my narcissism was being fed. But I would also kind of go away from church thinking, I didn't really solve the problem. The problem is not really solved. I mean, it still feels like no one's listening to my prayers. And it still feels like my prayers are either randomly answered or not answered.
Right.
And that we sort of selectively choose the times when our prayers are answered as evidence for the fact that someone's listening to our prayers, but we're just ignoring all the times when our prayers aren't answered. And how unsatisfying that it is as a notion that, oh, God just answers our prayers in His own time. So, maybe our prayers won't be answered until the next life. and how unsatisfying that is as an answer.
You're like, what's the point of the whole
What's
exercise?
the point? Exactly. And if God's will is just going to be done anyway, then why pray? You know? And that I'd throw these questions out and realize that I was never really answering them. So I think that was maybe the very beginning. And then I have to say a really hard demarcation of the beginning of the end of my faith was 9/11. You were here for that, right?
Actually, I was in Alaska.
Oh, you were?
But I was back shortly after.
Yeah, 9/11 was hard. I immediately felt very, very scared about my existence and my ability to survive in this world. And I clung to God and religion and the Book of Mormon like never before in my life, as just a safety raft, you know, just a life preserver. And honestly offering prayers every morning, noon, and night that God would preserve my life and protect me from the terrorists. I mean, I was just sure there was going to be anthrax in our drinking water or in the subway system any day now, you know? And that half the city would die. I was sure of it. It was very, very scary. I mean, I think my reaction to 9/11 was really, I look back on it and it just seems so kind of cute and quaint. I fell in love with firefighters in general, like the idea of firefighters. They were so heroic and they were so butch and manly and you know, just willing to risk their lives, and they looked so great with the grease on their faces and everything, and I was just in love with firefighters, and I made this little shrine almost. It was just a bunch of images that I cut out of the paper or newspapers of firefighters raising the flag at Ground Zero, and then there was a picture of the towers burning down, and there was I don't remember what other pictures.
Obsessing.
I was totally. I mean, I woke up crying every day for a month, I think.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the first thing I did, I had to turn the radio on or the TV and watch the news and make sure that we weren't under attack again. Yeah, I was really obsessed and scared. And then on the inside of this little, I kind of folded it and laminated it, and on the inside I sort of printed up in calligraphy. I'm so embarrassed about this, but I think it's kind of funny anyway. The covenant that I was making with God, that He would protect me and preserve me and grant me salvation if I committed to the following things. And it was this little creed of mine, and I committed to myself that I would read this every morning and then say a prayer every morning. I would drop to my knees first thing in the morning when I rolled out of bed, and I would read this thing, and it basically said that I would never do anything to jeopardize my status with God as Him being my best friend and loyal companion. And that was so code for I will never masturbate. It was, I mean, I might as well have just said that. I vow to not masturbate if God will protect me from the terrorists. Because that's exactly what I meant.
And did it make you feel better?
It did, and I white-knuckled my way for 6 months through not touching myself.
Wow.
After 9/11. Didn't touch myself for 6 months.
The terrorists won.
They did. The terrorists won.